then in turn, great writing, freedom of expression, it spurs us on to all manner of creative ideas which have, developed our civilization. And it's been a protected space. And the reason why there's very little law on it is because, what went on in your head was your own business. I mean, people might try and torture you to find out what was going on in your head. But the idea that this was the ultimate area of privacy.
When you say it's protected, isn't that just because most people never even think about where their thoughts come from or how thoughts got there in the first place?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, to some extent, our thoughts are products of influence, and they come out of the influences of our own development as small children, and then into adulthood. It's about what we read, about what we see, about the people we associate with, and of course, we're being influenced. We now watch television, and we're influenced all the time by advertisers and so on. I am an influencer. I'm an advocate in the courts. I try to persuade judges or juries to a particular perspective on a set of facts. So we're all involved in trying to influence the mind, but it is that ultimate space that is ours. Now, the great problem about it is that nowadays we are seeing the development of technology which has the capacity for, if you like, penetrating that space that is the ultimate area of privacy. And we know that because we know that the algorithms that are used by social media to find out more about us have been a way of monetizing information that is gathered by our own interaction.
Can you elaborate on that using the example of Cambridge Analytica?
Well, I was just going to mention Cambridge Analytica, and many of the listeners who attend Jaipur and so on will have had discussions about this in the past. But Cambridge Analytica really blew open for us something that hadn't been fully understood before. And Cambridge Analytica was exposed really during the elections. It was shown that information which is gathered about us, that there's something like 5,000 data points being gathered on each and every one of us if we use social media, that you start knowing the personality of those involved. I always remember a senior executive of Google once telling me that we know when an adolescent is homosexual before he or she does. And so it's
themselves. That's astonishing.
Just that because as a young person you might explore certain sites that you may and they may not even be obvious sites, gay sites. It may be just the books that you're reading or and that you download, or things that you download. Your choice of clothes perhaps might feed into this mosaic that they're creating of the kind of person that you are, where your interests lie, how you express yourself in so many different ways, and from those certain conclusions are drawn. Now that's very useful to people who are manufacturers of goods, retailers, and so on. It's very interesting to people who might be able to use that information to bombard you with advertisements and so on, and seduce you into spending money. So, there's a capitalist interest in it. But there's also an electoral interest in it. There's an interest in it by those who seek to have power within our governments. And what we saw with Cambridge Analytica was that it was being used in order to, if you like, nudge people in a certain direction, and to, when people had perhaps some indications of a dislike of foreigners or of the other, that you actually feed that, and that you then give messaging which shows you that a particular party might actually be more in sympathy with some of the things you think, and then you take them on a journey with you in a train of thought. And so those things, I think, have caused a level of alarm, and then a much greater analysis of this. Very interesting book written by Shoshana Zuboff, who's a professor at Harvard, and who's written a wonderful book called Surveillance Capitalism, where she's looked at the development since the early parts of the noughties, 2001, 2002, the development of social media and the ways in which monetizing of it, first of all, to sell stuff, was then captured by those who were in the political field and saw it as a potential for actually turning people's minds towards particular political parties or particular outcomes. And I think there's no doubt that it was used in the Brexit referendum, and it's being used in elections in other parts of Europe, but not just. We know that actually Cambridge Analytica was brought in on other different fronts, and organisations like Cambridge Analytica.
You mentioned that freedom of thought is a foundation. You describe it as a foundational right, and that it's Article 18 suggests to me that it was a little bit buried. It didn't even make the top 10. Does that suggest that this great human rights document is out of date and hasn't caught up with the technological advances?
Well, I listen when people say those sort of things, and it's true. We should be thinking of we should own our own data. And it shouldn't be that people can actually take hold of it without our consent. And of course, our consents are never really sought for any of this. And people would say that young people particularly are giving away lots of information about themselves without concern. And the implications of it don't worry them because they're much more open about private parts of their lives. However, I think that we should be concerned about the ways in which some of this it works. And we do find that it actually is about something much more than the ordinary business of advertising, of the powers of persuasion, the stuff that we knew and understood as being part of the business of selling stuff. But this is something which actually has more sinister connotations, especially when there isn't openness about it taking place.
So you suggest that there's financial and political gains to be had, but I want to set this now in the context of the current crisis, the coronavirus pandemic, as was discussed in the previous session. Two things are happening all over the world right now. One is increased surveillance and mass data collection, and the other is a drastic reimagining of state power. In this setting, what are the things that you think we should be looking out for and worried about?
Well, one of the things, I am the director of an Institute of Human Rights for the International Bar Association. So the International Bar Association is worldwide. It's 188 bar associations around the world. Many, many thousands of lawyers belong to it. And so I'm getting information fed to me as I sit at the center of this hub of the ways in which COVID-19 is being used. This virus is being used as a way in which governments are actually seizing more power than they've formerly had. I mean, only yesterday I was receiving the news about the business of Brazil and Bolsonaro, and there's a whole way in which he's been rather reckless in his dismissal of the need for distancing and for the need for some of the steps that are required. Now, in a crisis like this, where you have, it's happened sometimes over terrorism, and certainly in Britain, provisions to deal with a particular set of circumstances. And there's a way in which the democratic processes decide, okay, here we are going to actually take some of the the liberties that we really believe are vital in a democracy. We are going to kind of limit them in order to deal with a particular set of circumstances.
That will get public support when it's a question of public safety. People will want to do the right thing.
People, when terrorism was at its height during the Irish Troubles, and there were bombings here in London and places, there was absolute consensus around doing that. But what was agreed was that there had to be regular sunset clauses. There had to be revisiting of the
sunset clause. What does that mean?
A sunset clause is where you're saying automatically this law stops, in a year's time, unless Parliament agrees for it to be
an expiry date.
It's got an expiry date and a sell-by date.
Okay.
It's stamped there on it. And so in the recent change of law that's taken place to deal with the coronavirus here in the UK, in Parliament, I'm in the House of Lords, and so we, as a legislator, I with others, we all argued that it shouldn't be as long as 2 years, which was what government was asking for, and we said no, it has to be a sunset clause. It was 6 months. It can be renewed if that's necessary, and it may well be that it is, that some parts of it are, not all of it, but that there has to be monitoring, and at a monthly basis there should be monitoring of some of the particular provisions. Now then you get Orban in Hungary introducing law to deal with this crisis, but no sunset clauses, no limitation of time, and it's going to be a rule by decrees, and it will be his decree. So you see a seizing of power by people who are power hungry, and Orban has displayed that in his leadership in Hungary on many different things, reducing the power of the judges, reducing the power of the independent legal profession, attacking those who represent asylum seekers or refugees as lawyers. All manner of attacks on civil liberties and on human rights.
Your constructive advice would be to be looking out for new drastic measures and for be looking for a sunset clause in that.
You've got to be really vigilant, and I have to say that I am concerned about some of the things that have been happening in India too. I don't like the idea that the internet can be turned on and off, because one of the things that we know is that at times of crisis like this pandemic, what people need is good information. They're listening. It's like my grandparents did during the Second World War. They're listening to the radio every hour. People want information, and to turn off the internet, which for people nowadays is so much their source of information, is a terrible thing to do. And the poor, of course, who may have a mobile phone, is pay as you go, and if they haven't got money, then they're not going to have information. And so even if you have your internet running, you have to think about ways in which you can make it possible for people to have information. The other thing that happens, of course, is Bolsonaro has basically suspended the Freedom of Information Act, so people can't find out what is being done in their name by aspects of government. But it's happening in lots of different places.
So it's a big win for strong government and for big corporations. People need to be very vigilant. I'm actually getting some questions coming through now, Helena. I'm just going to ask some of them to you. Mitwa asks if there's advice that you could offer to a layperson about protecting fundamental rights. I think this is a work based on the question that I've just asked you, but it's about striking a balance between choosing between fake and real news, how to protect yourself from disinformation. Do you have any advice about that?
Well, you really have to work out yourself who are your trustworthy sources, where there's fact checking and so on. And so you really have to work out who do you rely on. The Pew Resource Center in the United States of America have done this with the American public, and it came as an interest to me that they included the BBC up there in their top 3 of reliable sources of information. And so you have to work out who can you rely on, and I'm afraid that there are times when even the sort of major sources of information are proving themselves instruments of false news too. So there is a problem about this. But journalists have to be protected during this period, and we are seeing populist governments attacking journalists everywhere. Freedom of expression, our right to media freedom is so important, and of course, all manner of law is used to go after journalists. So we've got to protect our media freedom.
Stick up for your journalists, even if you don't agree with them. Another question that's come through, again on a similar theme. I think there's a lot of anxiety out there. Ria Palresha asks, what could be a way to maintain a certain level of privacy whilst having to engage in social media for work and for professional and personal reasons? Because of course we're all digital, we're all remote now. How do we protect ourselves?
I mean, here we are having this meeting via Zoom, and I have to tell you that most of my day is taken up.
I know, quite a lot of us got Zoom fatigue.
Yes, and so we're using these incredible networks. I mean, it's wonderful that we have this technology. I mean, I can't see my grandbabies because my daughter's a doctor, and the chances is that we could be at risk, people of a certain age, and so it's wonderful that we can make connection with people that we love and care about, and then the people we work with, and the people who are fighting the great fight to keep protecting our rights around the world. I need this technology, and yet I do know that it is all being infiltrated into the pockets of people who will use ways I would not feel happy about, and I do think a moment's going to come when all this is over, where we really have to talk about the regulation of these platforms.
There's another related question to this that's just come through from Abi Tariq, who, and this comes off the comments you made about Brexit. This person asks, could you let me know how we get rid of manufactured consent? I actually don't know what manufactured consent is.
Well, I know exactly what your question is asking about, because you can well, there's a very interesting thing called astroturfing. And astroturfing is an expression that's used. Of course, astroturf was that terrible pretend grass that's used, and my boys used to play football on it when they were little. And astroturfing is where organizations are set up, and they are to generate what are seen as being grassroots opinion, and it uses all the techniques of the Cambridge Analytica methodology, which is to give feed information which is dishonest to ordinary people and make them fearful. And Brexit, definitely, people were made to believe that that millions of Turkish people were going to be entering Britain tomorrow, if we remained in the European Union.
And
people were made to believe
consent. What are the implications?
Well, it's about you then say the people have spoken. And in fact, in Britain, in Brexit, it was very much half and half. But you manufacture a notion, which is, we had this. We went to the public, we asked them their view, they came back and they said that, and therefore we have got the consent of the people. Well, you've got consent of 52% of the people, and an awful lot of the information that was given to them to secure that consent was manufactured information. You see, if you have a jury, I've spent my life as a jury trial lawyer, and I know that's not the system everywhere in the world, but I would be trying to persuade people. But it would be based on evidence, and it would be based on evidence that was tested and tested in front of those people, so they would be able to gauge its truthfulness and whether it was reliable or not. And I'm afraid, in short order, people are given information which was never properly tested, and where lies were promulgated in ways that were really alarming. And I'm afraid that's becoming much more commonplace now. And you can manufacture consent on that for the most terrible things. You've got it happening in places. That's what populism does, is that you make something very simple. You turn everything into something really simple. Who's the problem? It's the foreigner. Why are you not being paid properly? Instead of saying, well, maybe it's because people are taking too much profit out of certain industries and you're not getting your proper day's wages. No, it's because other folk are coming and taking jobs and they're working for less.
What's so clever about it also, to bring it into the realm of the literature, the dystopian genre, is rather than it being like 1984 with centralized state of terror, thought police, mind control, it's almost a hyperabundance that kind of washes over people of these messages, some of it disinformation. So it's actually not what George Orwell envisaged.
Some of it's quite Orwellian in that he did foresee ways in which messaging could be so distorting, and that language could be distorted in order to mislead people. And so that there are aspects of it which are true, whatever the methodology is. It's still the same traits go through that kind of populist authoritarian ways of securing power and maintaining it, ostensibly with consent and manufactured, because you persuade people that the only way to do things is by having a strong man who takes control and who's going to lead it. And I'm afraid I'm not impressed with the way that Donald Trump is doing that in the United States just now. He must be having nightmares because, of course, his own business interests are going down the Swanee because of this. So I don't imagine he's sleeping well at night with his hotels and his casinos and his golf clubs.
We both look really heartbroken about that. We're going to say we've got another question come through about the misuse of sedition law to target activists and whether that's the case in England now.
Well, we don't have sedition anymore.
That was a gift to other countries.
Yeah, but the awful thing is, I was just going to say that, is that we visited this kind of law to large parts of the world in which we colonized, and so all manner of law was distributed widely, and a lot of it then gets repealed. It's been repealed back in the UK, but it hasn't been repealed in other places. But lots of countries in the world use, it's not just sedition, but they also have laws which are about, that if you criticize the leader, or you say something bad about the king, or you say something bad about the main party. I mean, that's one of the worrying things about Orban. He's just brought in a law in which he's saying that any kind of criticism or false information, and it sounds as if he's dealing with the virus, but it's drafted in a way where journalists are saying, actually, this is going to be, any of us who criticize him are going to be at risk of consequences. And you see it with Erdogan, the huge numbers of journalists who've been imprisoned. But not just that, then the lawyers who represent the dissenters or the critics or the journalists, they end up in jail too.
Another question's come through. This one's from Amprakash Parikh, and he asks, don't you think that the victory of right-wing parties in the US, Latin America, Europe, Turkey have adversely affected freedom of expression and human rights? I should add that by and large they're democratically elected, so there's a tension there.
Well, yes, but populism, it always follows from that business where, I mean, we can now do the analysis, and it's a fairly well-known one, which is that globalization, the economic crisis that happened in 2008, has had consequences, which has led to much greater kind of polarization between rich and not even the poor, but I mean even ordinary professionals around the world are earning much less money, and people's incomes have been static for many years, and so a great deal of disaffection, a great deal of unhappiness, and you provide simplistic answers to how things will be made good for you, and that's how you win a big election. And then you in securing your power, you start wanting to change things, the length of time in which you can be allowed to hold power.
Why can't human rights people and people on the human rights then have their message just as simple? Why aren't they winning that messaging war, if you want to call it?
Because the nature of our lives and the nature of our world is actually complex. And so people are not, by and large, if you have a proper kind of debate with people are not so stupid. And I think that people then eventually see the ways in which they've been misused. And so, yes, Orban has got a huge majority in his parliament, and he has got the support of the people. But a point will come where people will see that this was not to serve them, but is to serve him. And that's what happens. And so, populism in the end has the seeds of its own destruction. But the world is complex, and so and left-wing governments do this too. Sometimes they come in with simplistic answers, and then of course they too do nasty things. I mean, Venezuela, in the name of giving dealing fairness to the people, as soon as there was any criticism in the media, Chavez and his follower have closed those voices down.
We're very close to running out of time now. I do want to ask you, as we're watching, the world is changing incredibly rapidly in ways that very few of us understand. Thank goodness for JLF being online, where we can explore these things. But I wonder if there's something that you wish for as a positive development that can come out of what's happening.
Well, I mean, the thing that I think is definitely happening is that people are suddenly reflecting on their lives and the things that really matter. And the whole business of, where we turned money into a supreme value, and the way in which, everything was being judged, and you were a winner or a loser, and he's a loser. But winning was meant that you were at the top of the tree financially. That sort of thing is being visited again, and people are saying, did we get that right? What kind of society do we want to live in? And I think that that has been, I've watched this happening, and I've seen how kind people are to each other. As I say, my daughter's a doctor, and she's in the National Health Service. And my God, when you see the support those young doctors and nurses and carers and people have, the porters, all of them doing this fantastic job at this terrible time, and the love they get from the general public. And so it makes me feel we can do this everywhere. We could make this better, and we actually ought to do it. And I think it would be very hard for a Conservative government. This was a Conservative government that came in saying it was going to deregulate and it was going to do all that stuff, and now it's had to use the power that the state can have to make a society better. And so I think it'd be very.
That gives you hope that this is a moment of reflection, and that it's time to think.
And you have to protect rights and civil liberties, and you have to make sure that the rule of law is maintained in the face of the most terrible things. Because if we don't do that, we lose one of the essential pillars of a decent society.
Another question's just come through. We're going to have to answer this one quickly. It's from Ujwal Godeshwani. Can media be independent and sovereign during an exceptional time of state? How do we ensure that? I think you may have answered that with your support for journalists, but is there anything you can add?
Yeah. I do. I mean, I think that you have to have responsible journalism, and I think that sometimes, for example, I think it's quite interesting that some platforms and some of the media is saying we are not going to feed some of these phony stories that this virus has been created by masks are creating the internet and etc. And that that people are going to plant things in your brain, and I mean, we're not going to put those things out, because actually it really is going to undermine the efforts that we're making to really deal with this virus and this contamination, one to the other. The way in which you deal with contagion is by good information and none of the trash. So I think that sometimes you just have to be selective about what you give space to.
Okay, I'm gonna violate your right to privacy and also the laws of Zoom. Are you wearing your slippers, Helena?
No, I'm not, but I am wearing some trainers. I'm wearing some.
Oh, I put on my poshest boots because it's JLF, and for you.
No, but I didn't wear an old sweatshirt.
Okay, I want to thank you very, very much. I want to thank all of the audience and the questions coming in. We'll please carry on the debate, and hand back over now to Sanjoy. Thank you so much. Thank you, JLF.
Thank you so much, Baroness Helena Kennedy. Thank you, B. Rowlatt. You're absolutely right. We need to protect rights even more so now, and we need responsible journalism. Thank you for doing your bit to do this. Please log on to our JLF sites across the media handles. And for those of you who've logged on, thank you so much for being there, for asking questions. Remember, we're going to be back now on Saturday and Sunday. On Saturday at 7:30 p.m. IST, we have Siddharth Mukherjee and Peter Frankopan in conversation, Corona Chronicles, the past, present, and future of pandemics. For those of you who read Siddharth's book, this is going to be the most important session, so do log on. And at 9 o'clock on the same day, given what's been happening with migrant workers in India, we've got Tracking the Plight of Migrant Workers with Chinmay Tumbe in conversation with Sabha Naqvi. On the Sunday, we will have Jhumpa Lahiri in conversation with Chiki Sarkar. And of course, we have Jeet Thayal in conversation with Nandini Nair. So remember, log on, share, ask your questions. Most importantly, Baroness Helena Kennedy, B. Rowlatt, as the Queen said, we shall meet again. And on those happy times and a happy note, good night. Thank you all.
Bye. Bye.
Good night.